Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's 9:30 and it's time for me to open this hearing session on Matter 6, Employment, Retail and Town Centre Requirement. So for those who haven't met us yet, I'm Dr. Rachel Bust, and this is my colleague Caroline Malloy, and we are the inspectors jointly appointed to hold the examination of the Lewisham local plan. So before I go too much further, can everyone hear me? I'm looking towards the back of the room and across the tables. Yes, thank you. So could everyone please ensure that they've got mobile phones and any other devices switched on to silent while we're in session, and that microphones are muted until you need to speak. That way we can avoid any disturbance in background noise or feedback from the microphones on computers. Now, experience so far from week one, you need to sit quite close to the microphones to make sure it picks up everything that you're saying. And that's quite important because the sessions are being live streamed. So we need to make sure that anyone watching remotely can hear everything as well. Does anyone present have any objections to live streaming? Thank you. Could I just turn to the council to remind us all about the fire alarms, the evacuation procedures and the facilities for the building, please? Thank you.
Yeah, just to say that there are no scheduled tests for the fire alarm. So if the fire alarm goes off, then it is a real fire alarm. The evacuation points are clearly signalled within the room, and the evacuation point in terms of meeting is on the Broadway next to the Costa Coffee. Hopefully everyone knows where that is. Facilities in terms of toilets, etc., out the door to the left, clearly signed.
Thank you for that. So the procedure for the hearing sessions, they will take the form of a structured discussion, which we'll be leading based on the agenda, which is also linked to the matters, issues and questions that have previously been circulated. Has everybody got a sight of an agenda? Good. So we will try and bring you in at a relevant point, but if you do wish to make a point, if you can put your nameplate up, please, and we'll bring you in as soon as we can. We'd like to remind everyone taking part in the discussion that you should have provided all of your evidence in your original representation. So the hearing sessions are an opportunity to explore matters, but they're not an opportunity to submit anything further. So any comments that you're making in the sessions need to relate to the points in your representation. Please respect each other in terms of letting people finish their point before moving on, and questions do come through us rather than across the table, even when you want to know something from another party. Does anybody have any questions at this stage about the session? No? So before we begin the session, just going to turn to the council. The action list, thank you very much for those. We've had a look at those, and Mr. Kemp's got them back. So hopefully they will be, if they're not back with you already, they will be back with you shortly. Mr. Kemp is obviously not with us this week, but I understand Ms. Kabir is stepping in to provide some cover. Thank you for that. So can we then move on to Matter 6 and ask participants for today's session to introduce themselves? I'll start with the council, please.
Hello, I'm Angela Stewart, Principal Policy Officer at Lewisham Council.
David Syme, I'm the Head of Strategic Planning at Lewisham.
Good morning, I am Karol Jakubczyk. I'm the Council's Planning Policy Manager.
Dean Gibson, Principal Planning Officer.
Keenan Hassan, Senior Policy Officer.
Thank you. And for this side of the room, I think we've got, if I start at the front, we've got Lewisham House number 1 from Knight Frank, please.
Sophie Carty, Knight Frank.
Good morning, Chris Benham, Knight Frank. Good morning, Adrian Fox from Quad for Landsec.
Good morning, Paula Carney from Carney Sweeney, representing Kitewood.
Right, thank you for that. So from the agenda for today as a whole, we've got matter 6 and matter 8. So in terms of this morning's session, we're going to focus on the requirement. So it's more about the requirement itself and the principle of the sites being selected. So site-specific details such as issues of boundaries and more detailed matters will be covered when we get to the site allocation stage. But this session is more about this morning will be about the requirement, the numbers, but the session this afternoon will look more at the criterion of the policies of how they operate in practice. So as a consequence of the structure of the policies in the chapter, we may touch on some policies this morning that we'll then come back to this afternoon, but for two different reasons. So let's move on to the employment land requirement. So we're looking into policies EC1 and EC2, and we're also following the link to the MIQs. So if you've got a copy of those to hand, it's also helpful if you've got sight of the composite schedule of proposed modifications that the council has put forward. That was revised on the 17th of June. So just an updated version. So let's look at policies EC1 and EC2. So in terms of the methodology for the office floor space, so I'm going to turn to the council first. So we've got the employment land study, which did conclude that office space was required. So if you can just sort of set the context and summarise the methodology of how the calculations you've gone through to get to the figure of the 21,800 square metres, which is in the policy. Simon, thank you.
Yes, I can start off and then hand over to colleagues to provide the detail. As per the MIQ response, the technical evidence that sets out the methodology in the background has been submitted for examination. So we have the Employment Land Study 2019, which is EB 26. And the subsequent additional material prepared under the Lewisham Industrial Employment Land Report, EB 22, which effectively forecasts the scale of need within the borough. In terms of the 21,800 net, this looked at forecast in population growth, forecast in demand, and also looked at existing planning approvals and came to a conclusion that over the 15-year period up to 2038 at that time, we require 21,800 square metres net additional employment floor space. I think it's important to note that that is essentially office and not industrial floor space, which was the point of clarity that the Greater London Authority wanted through the Regulation 19 response, which we've come on to and which we've worked very hard with the GLA to get to an agreed position. Carol, is there anything in terms of the employment methodology, the office methodology that you want to pick up?
Yes, I would direct the examination to, get this straight, document EB 26, in paragraphs, it's chapter 6 specifically in its entirety, but moving on into the detail, it's paragraphs 26 onwards. paragraphs 30, which speaks to to aspects of the methodology, 31, which speaks to the sensitivity testing that was applied to that. Its associated table 6.1. And the subsequent paragraphs, which speaks to the different scenarios that were tested through that method assessment process. The document does continue, specifically looking at the sort of the changes in office employment demand during the period 2016 to 41. So I think unfortunately not neatly within the planned period, but I think the intention is clear. Those are set out on under the subsequent tables, 6.2 to 6.3. And I would refer the examination to paragraphs 6.38 to 40, which set out the conclusions of that assessment of office floor space projection.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. So just moving on to sort of the split between B2 and B8. You know, I noted that the office space was required, but you'd had some industrial land that had been lost through the process. But the evidence wasn't. Some of the evidence wasn't looking towards needing more industrial employment land requirement. So I just want to explore a little bit more of that, please. I have a few questions. So in terms of from EB 22 and LC1, the update, how have you reached the figure of a net loss of 12.4 hectares of the baseline of industrial land for that 2016 to 41 period? And are the figures looking at job growth or loss projections? Just give you a few questions, and then it might be that you can wrap up responses into one. And how do the results of the 2023 report differ from the 2019 study in terms of the forecasts and the land requirements? I'll stop there with those three, and if you want to have a look at those three questions, and then I might have a few more. Thank you.
Yes, if I kick off and then again hand over to my colleague for the detail. I think it's important to say that the planned release of strategic industrial land followed the adoption of our core strategy some time back, and this was analysis of vacant industrial land, which we carried out with the Greater London Authority, which agreed that there was surplus industrial land within the borough at that time. As a consequence, the spatial strategy for the core strategy was predicated on the release of strategic industrial land, significant vacant strategic industrial land, and redevelopment of mixed employment land sites. Those are the MELs in the policy, which are then taken forward into the local plan. I think it's also important to note that all of those MELs have current consents on them, planning approvals on them. Some have been developed and constructed and completed. Others are under construction. So the baseline that we took forward was the assumption that those kind of vacant areas would continue through to the local plan. It is factually kind of accurate that those sites have got consented applications and they are all proceeding in terms of their development. So that was the starting point. Notwithstanding that, we have done some additional work related to this in response to the 2020 evidence that the GLA carried out, published in 2023, and looked at in a more granular fashion the losses during the period. And we have come to the conclusion, and the GLA agree, that the losses are not as significant as outlined in their 2023 document, which is, I'm looking at my colleague, agreed in a statement of common ground with the GLA. And actually, the result is that there is no effective need for industrial land over the course of the plan period. Nevertheless, and again, I'd like to point out in terms of B2, B8, we did have a discussion with the GLA about the specific requirements of specifying floor space for B2, B8 and disaggregating those uses. Whilst the council accepts through the kind of negotiations that the GLA wanted those figures, there is no specific requirements, as we can see, in terms of national policy or the London plan that actually points to specifying those. Nevertheless, we have done that, and that is essentially looking at the sort of redesignation of 3 strategic industrial land sites, which I'm sure we will come on to, and so I won't go into any greater detail on that, and look at providing subsequent area of land and floor space to accommodate that. Carol, was there any further?
If I may firstly start by thanking David for that, because I believe he explained that in a much more articulate and dynamic way than I could have. In fact, I was dreading having to explain some aspects of that. I think in response, in sort of adding further detail for the benefit of the examination, I would refer the inspectors to documents. I think it was originally EB24, its subsequent revision LC1, and probably in terms of the most succinct and articulate summary document LC6, which I think explains all of this in the most sort of concise and readable manner. I think the key points I'd pull out that David covered was that yes, and these are sort of articulated through section 3 of LC6, are that the latest GLA study, if I can just find its title, the London Industrial, no, that's not it. My apology. No, that is it. The London Industrial Land Supply Study 2020, publication date March 2023. That piece of strategic piece of technical evidence appears to show loss in industrial floor space in Lewisham. I should caveat, and I believe this is best articulated through LC1 and LC6, that piece of work was carried out at a capital level, so was not specific to Lewisham. I would highlight that there were a number of health warnings attached to that piece of work, although the council doesn't dispute in any way the technical evidence that fed into that. In fact, the council contributed towards that technical evidence. So, as I said, the London Industrial Land Supply Study 2020 appears to show net loss in industrial floor space, and that, in part, triggered the sort of handful of concerns that the GLA expressed, which ultimately resulted in their letter to the Reg 19 stage that identified an issue of two issues of general conformity, which the examination has already heard some initial discussion around. The council had, I think, as I explained last week, Inspector Bust, that the council sought through that intervening period from Regulation 19 publication through to submission and then onwards into examination to resolve this matter with the GLA. That in part resulted in the preparation and production of LC1, which provides a more deep dive look at actual on the ground losses and tried to explain the perception or the conclusions that the London Industrial Land Supply Study 2020 reached. Rather than have me wade through that, I'd refer the examination to document LC6, section 3 and paragraphs. Well, I'll start with the London Industrial Land Supply Study, paragraphs 311 to 313, and then onwards from 314 to the end of that section, which then provides, I think, a thorough explanation of what happened and what the actual position as far as the technical data we have demonstrates, and that as David said, is a much more brighter picture in terms of industrial land supply, and indeed evidence that the borough is actually delivering industrial intensification. That process, as I'm sure we'll hear shortly, eventually led to the agreed position between the council and the Mayor of London, and the resolution of the issues of around general conformity, which are wrapped up in the changes to policy EC2 that are being proposed. I think as a potential precursor to further discussion, it's worth pointing out that some of the matters raised by my colleague around the nature of industrial employment floor space demand in the borough, and some of the perceptions that have possibly been applied at the strategic level towards that demand picture, specifically around, I would describe, using the words that my GLA colleagues use, the need for land by dirty, nasty industries for the sort of large-scale B2, B8 uses. What our technical evidence is showing that, unlike other parts of the capital that historically had heavy industry presence, the demand within Lewisham has changed and evolved over time. And whilst the borough maintains a supply of those sites, and we can certainly point to those locations, some of them are designated as strategic industrial locations, others are non-designated employment sites that genuinely serve a strategic industrial employment floor space purpose. Whilst we maintain that supply, and certainly just to reinforce the issue around surplus, we are not seeking through our plan making and decision activities to lose that supply, because it is needed. We are accepting through our plan making that the type of industrial employment floor space that is in demand in the borough is now different from that dirty, nasty, unsociable typologies that the GLA have referred to at the sort of strategic level. One final point, and it's around the mixed use employment locations, which again I'd refer the examination to LC6. Just to clarify, whilst these are sites that the council is encouraging regeneration, redevelopment and placemaking through the site allocation policies and the generic policy in the economy and culture section, many, if not all of these sites are historic industrial sites. That there is perhaps a misconception that these sites have either active uses or could return to active industrial employment use at the flick of a switch. That's not the case. I'm certain if the inspectors have visited Convoy's Wharf, whilst it may have historically, many decades ago, served a very valuable industrial employment function, that industrial employment function, those uses are effectively lapsed in planning terms. Thank you.
Thank you. So just out of the trio of questions that I posed, just coming back to the one in the middle, which was about, are the figures looking at job growth or loss projections? If you could just comment on that one, please.
Thank you, Inspector Bust. I would, again, referring to the background paper LC6, I've been very kindly by my colleague directed to paragraph 3.8, and it's the third bullet point. If I may add, it's certainly from my understanding of the data and the assessment process, it's not about specific levels of job growth. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Somebody got their mic on. Can you hear me okay? Just in terms of the projections, normally doing this sort of study, one would look at the jobs growth figure, or maybe not projected jobs growth, and then convert that into an kind of a floor space requirement. So the starting point is often, in terms of demand, is looking at potential jobs growth, and then that in jobs growth in specific sectors, and then translating that into floor space requirement. So I just wondered what the position is on that, and presumably in terms of office space, there's a demand for that in terms of jobs. But what's the picture in terms of B2 and B8 specifically in that sector?
Could the council please request to get back to the inspectors on that specific matter? So we don't have the answer to hand.
That's fine. If
Thank
we
you.
Just make a note of that as an action. Is that something that you could do this morning while we're in the session, as opposed to take it away?
We can do that this morning. Yes.
Thank you. That's helpful. So I think as we're looking at this topic, it's also about on the theme of future jobs. What in the Lewisham context would be the key headlines? So officers, the net addition to the stock. I think the 2019 study referred to some of that. It's specifically paragraph 6.39 I was looking at in terms of that question.
Apologies. Could you repeat the question?
So in terms of your headline, so what did the analysis of the future jobs growth look at in terms of sectors? So what are the key headlines for each of the sectors? So do you have any sort of data on that in terms of, so for officers, the net addition to office stock between 2018 to 2033 was looking something around 10,000 square metres, 15,000 square metres, that sort of thing. So it's what did the analysis tell you about the future jobs growth?
Yeah, if I may start off and then hand over to my colleagues. So again, looking at the Lewisham Industrial Employment Land, EB24, I think it is. I think it was maybe relabeled LC1. Is that correct? So what we have got within that document is in table 2.1, we have a stock of industrial land broken down into various services, including dark kitchens all the way to waste management and recycling. We then have figure 3.2, which looks at employee jobs in the industrial sector in Lewisham, which is a factual breakdown of where we are at the moment. And then we have employment projections by sector in figure 3.3, 23 to 38, which looks at a whole range of employment projections by sector, including retail, but also manufacturing, financial insurance, etc. So it covers a wider range than employment, but also picks up the key employment and industrial sectors. And then table 3.2 is the summary table, which looks at industrial employment projections, period 23 to 38.
Thank you. So in terms of the forecasts, how do they compare to the past completion trends? Is there a step change being proposed here?
I think in terms of past completions, I mean, what we are seeing and what we've seen through the authority monitoring report is some loss in non-designated industrial floor space through permitted development rights, but also through just a kind of general regeneration. But what we're also seeing is we're seeing an intensification of employment floor space, industrial floor space within our strategic industrial land coming forward, innovative types of industrial floor space, such as stacked industrial floor space, making more efficient use of industrial floor space as well within our strategic industrial land, incorporating larger floor space in units and mezzanine levels as well. So we're seeing an increase there. I think we're also seeing an increase in demand for non-conventional office space. Office space that can be hired, for example, those types of products that can support home working, and that's seen through the evidence base that we provided, but also practical on the ground intelligence as well in Lewisham Town Centre, where we're seeing that. Carol, any further things to add?
Yes, if I may refer the inspectors to submitted document EB22, which I believe is the document David may have been referring to, which is also known as LC1. Just for clarity to the inspectors and to the other participants, I believe the differences between the two documents are minimal, so they are practically interchangeable, particularly in terms of how participants may reference them in terms of page numbering or section numbering. So if I could refer the inspectors to section 3.2, industrial land demand. Sadly, it's not paragraph numbered, but from pages 10 onwards, I believe many of the questions the inspectors had sought clarity on are answered. I will hesitate to say that includes the question around job growth, but I will confirm that. In addition, if I may, again, I would thank one of my colleagues for kindly reminding me of the content. In document LC6, the employment background paper, I'd refer to paragraph 3.23, which speaks, I think, in summary, to the study, which is, I think, document EB22 stroke LC1, and summarises by saying that many of the activities being undertaken in modern, high emphasis, industrial premises involve a blend of production, storage, office, creative, and sales space, which does not neatly fit into traditional use classes. This is a precursor to potential discussions which do relate to the matters that were discussed between the Council and the Mayor of London around the issue of general conformity, about how future modern industrial employment floor space is provided, particularly where, as in Lewisham, there is a focused demand for industrial employment floor space that doesn't neatly fit into the B2, B8 use categories. And I'll offer this up to the examination now as a sort of a plot spoiler, but does fit quite conveniently within the opportunities provided by new class E brackets G brackets 3. And which I think is quite neatly summarised in LC6 para 3.23. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the industrial employment land reports and the loss of some hectares, just take me through why that's the case. Is that structural change, or is it something else? And in terms of then, are the projections then realistic?
Yes, in terms of the former industrial land, which is now vacant and, as Carol, I think, reiterated, is no longer being used as industrial, and given the planning consents on the site and the fact that the majority of the sites have started on site, then these sites cannot feasibly be brought back into industrial uses. And therefore, the baseline position was that because of those core structural changes within Lewisham, which had been and are accepted broadly with the GLA and with Lewisham, that would be the starting point. You know, just to reiterate, the release of those sites as MELs, all of them have planning applications approved for mixed use development, and the majority are on site and several have been completed. So that was the starting point that the studies then build upon. And I think it's important to say, unless I'm corrected by my colleague here, that I think that is the starting point for the GLA's work as well, looking at the loss. So I think there's an acceptance, you know, having done the granular. I think the concern from the GLA was that we'd actually lost more land than the projected release through the core strategy. When we did the granular work, and again, Carol reiterated this was a strategic analysis by the GLA looking at all of London. When we then did the granular work, again with the GLA, that additional release, there wasn't that additional release, and they were happy that the release of the industrial land was within the baseline assumptions that we'd been making through the core strategy back in 2013, whenever it was adopted.
If I may sort of briefly add to that, and just to clarify a point that David made, I believe when, certainly from the discussions that we had and the sort of the clarity we received from the Greater London Authority, the perception was that capital-wide study was revealing an unplanned release. I think just to reiterate and clarify the point David made, upon examination, specifically the sites that were released and what sites the data considered, the apparent loss in industrial employment land floor space that the 2020 study shows was actually showing the anticipated and planned for situation as planned by the previous Lewisham core strategy, and as implemented or facilitated through decision taking and I think this is an important point to clarify, as implemented through decision taking undertaken by both the council as the local planning authority and the Greater London Authority as the higher tier authority. So the approach, effectively the approach that's set out in the new local plan is a continuation of that restructuring. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just turning to the modification that we've got, which is in the appendix to the Statement of Common Ground, and it's also on the mods list. We just need to be really clear on the 1,000 square metres of B8 and the 4,000 square metres of B2 that's being proposed in there. So if we could just come straight back to that. Mr. Syme, is that something you want to respond to, or is that a point that you wanted to carry on for the previous question?
I just wanted to return to the job growth and projections. Helpfully, my colleague has directed me to the relevant section within the evidence base. So in the 2019 Employment Land Study, section 6, starting at paragraph 6.15, it looks at borough employment projections. Paragraph 6.17 looks at the GLA projections as well as the borough projections. So those projections are in there, and I think the growth, there's an increase of 10,100 jobs, which are identified. So yes. So it's also in EB 22 as well, which is LC1.
Sorry, what was that reference in terms of the figures? The jobs growth figures.
The paragraph 6.17, which says the GLA projections for Lewisham's employment growth in terms of jobs. So from 79,200 in 2016 to 89,200 in 2041.
Just to summarise for us, it's just trying to think of whether there are job growth projections within B2 and B8 sectors, and how that ties into the potential loss of industrial land. So it's just trying to drill down to whether what the jobs growth figures are for B2 and B8 type of uses, whether there are job growth figures there or whether there's a net loss, as I suspect there may be, but it's just finding the evidence for that.
If we may, we can take that away and try to find those figures for the inspectors. I would point out that in terms of the industrial floor or industrial land loss, again, just to reiterate the point that the planned release of ex-industrial land through MELs, the council doesn't consider that as a loss because these sites are they're not within existing industrial use. And they have been agreed for planned release, and they have planning permissions and stroke or being built out or completed.
Mr. Syme, your Toblerone's up. Your nameplate's up. a legacy one, that's fine. So just turning back to the Statement of Common Ground and those figures that are in the appendix there. So we just need to be absolutely crystal clear on on how you've got to that 1,000 square metres of B8 and the 4,000 square metres of B2. Just take us through that, I'd be grateful.
So the council has submitted a note on this. I'd describe it as an explanation of the working out process. My apologies, I'm unclear what its title is, but it's dated the 21st of May 2024, and it's entitled Lewisham Local Plan Examination Note for Inspectors, and it only runs to 4 pages. But I would refer the examination to that note's section 3, which is entitled Proposed Modification Baseline Target for Industrial Intensification. In the communications between the Greater London Authority and the Council, the Greater London Authority were clear that what they were seeking in order to secure general conformity with their London plan was that the council and the new local plan provide a baseline position that the decision takers could focus upon in terms of delivering industrial intensification. That was their specific requirement, and how the council arrived at that calculation is set out under paragraphs 3.1 through to 3.9 of that note.
I think you could take us through it though and explain it, please.
So the explanation of the methodology starts from paragraph 3.5, which states that the methodology for undertaking this exercise used existing information already set out in the technical evidence documents that are summarised within the employment background paper LCO6 under its section 3. It continues at the Greater London Authority for identifying a baseline target seeks to compensate for the 3 former strategic industrial locations that are being redesignated as locally significant industrial sites. As has already been alluded to, those have been the area of contention, or one of the sort of apparent areas of contention between the council and the new local plans approach and the Greater London Authority's position. The note continues by identifying the potential capacity on those, cognizant that there will be there's the potential for industrial employment uses, and indeed that's what the policy directs towards those 3 sites being delivered on there, and continues by providing a sort of an assumed calculation of employment floor space under 3.7, based on data from the VOA. It's my understanding that's whilst that's a sort of a simplistic and pragmatic approach, it is an approach that's taken and used elsewhere. And paragraph 3.8 sets out the results of that process.
Right. Still slightly struggling to see where the figures came from. Overall, the background documents state that there's no need for a B2, B8 land use overall in the bigger picture. But we still have a potential requirement here, which the note explains is to sort of compensate for the three former strategic industrial locations being designated as locally significant industrial sites. But overall, there isn't a need. If those are being redesignated from strategic industrial locations to locally significant industrial sites, they're still, even as a locally industrial, even a local site would still count towards the overall requirement. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
So I suppose I'm just trying to get my head around why there's a net need arising from the redesignation, if you see where I'm coming from.
I think this is through negotiation with the Greater London Authority. I think in terms of their concern, strategic industrial land to ELSIS opens up the possibility of other employment uses which are not B2, B8 being located. And I think Carol spoke very eloquently on those types of uses that don't neatly fall within the B2E, B8. We think and I'm sure we'll come on to this in terms of detailed discussion around these three sites, that it is appropriate for those to be de-designated. But the GLA were insisting, in response to the London plan policy on co-location and the need to identify compensatory strategic industrial land, that strategic industrial land is located, and we've located that within the Bermondsey Dive Under site. And then the figures relating to the kind of net need show the kind of compensatory effect of that, essentially. I think it's also important to note that in terms of job growth, in terms of encouraging intensification, and in terms of delivering industrial and employment use, obviously the council sees that as a key benefit for the plan over the longer term. So we don't see the issue or the problem with having this target, which is over and above the baseline position of, as you rightly say, no requirement. I think it's also important to note that in terms of thinking about the consequences, these are not sites where we would necessarily be encouraging ground floor residential because of their nature, and therefore actually in terms of practical delivery terms, they are likely to be delivering employment uses on the ground floor.
Just in terms of the strategic sites, what type of uses would they include? Because I think that the plan doesn't necessarily identify specific uses for specific sites, which well, that may be an issue from a monitoring point of view, but the you're sort of saying that there could be a change, if you like, in the nature of the use or the potential net loss because of the shift in the type of uses. Is that right?
That's the general perception that the GLA have. The council maintains that this is good placemaking, and we'll come on to this in terms of the three sites that we're proposing to redesignate. But in terms of the uses that they wish to see within strategic industrial land, it is generally focused around the B2 and BA. And whilst, again, in terms of ELSIS and co-location, those uses can be, there are some uses which clearly are incompatible with the kind of co-location, and those are, to coin Carol's phrase, the dirtier uses. But needless to say, there are uses within the B2, B8 spectrum which are perfectly comfortable sitting alongside the kind of co-location options, timber merchants, etc., etc. So there's also a clear indication of the types of activity that the GLA are looking for within their strategic industrial location set out in the London Plan Policy E4. And we've referenced that in the Bermondsey Dive Under survey report, LC13 figure 9, which effectively goes through, it provides a matrix or a table which goes through the operational requirements for these types of locations.
So essentially moving the sites from strategic locations to locally significant sites, there may be more non-B2, B8 uses creeping in, and therefore there needs to be a compensation for that. I just want to be really clear on this.
I would say broadly that is the GLA's impression, yes.
If I could just expand on that very quickly, I think very early on in our discussions with the Greater London Authority, the point that David is making, that they're around those sort of other, I'd describe them as the uses that sort of sit in the middle of the Class E table, the sort of the very valid and necessary uses such as nursery provision, dentists, etc. Genuine main town centre uses, as opposed to those that sit at the bottom of the Class E use class that are potentially main town centre uses, but equally, I think, as David has explained, could just as easily sit comfortably within locally significant industrial sites, or indeed where they are more intense and expansive, potentially on strategic industrial locations themselves. And I think it was that specific concern that Class E, which is still an evolving use class, and certainly in terms of how decision takers and plan makers deploy Class E and manage it through the implementation process. That's still evolving. So I think their wariness of Class E is understandable as a strategic plan maker. But nevertheless, I believe the council was able to reassure through the evidence process, through EB22 and LC1, that actually Class E brackets G brackets 3 provides opportunities for ELSIS sites to come forward and regenerate and be a vehicle for delivering the types of employment floor space that there is genuine demand for in Lewisham. Just very quickly, if I may, inspectors, coming back to a point, and perhaps we were too subtle in making it. The issue, one of the key issues for the Greater London Authority in setting those two benchmark figures was to provide a hook to achieve intensification. If you read, as I'm sure you have, through the London Plan, intensification within the employment context appears time and time again. I think broadly, and forgive me, I'm stating the obvious, it is a key aspect of successful and sustainable placemaking across the capital, and it equally applies to making the best use of the capital's industrial employment land and securing the best capacity from that land that's available. Obviously, it is a finite resource, particularly within inner and greater London. That connects up to a point, and again, forgive us for not making it clearer about the relationship between Lewisham and the more distant central activities zone, and I won't say the dependence, but the interrelationship between the central activities zone and employment, particularly industrial employment opportunities provided within Lewisham, not exclusively in the north of Lewisham, but particularly in the north, but I think it equally applies all the way down here into Catford and potentially beyond. There is an interrelationship, and I believe our evidence, and again, forgive me for stressing it repeatedly through documents such as LC6 and the responses to the Matter 6 MIQs. These uses are the archetypal, evolved, modern industrial employment floor space, the servicing the service uses that I believe our external expert coined. So I think, as David has already said, that amalgamation of mutation of B2 and B8 uses that don't sit comfortably within historic use class definitions. Thank you.
I don't wish to labour the point too far, but in terms of the calculation, I hear what you've explained, and that's helpful to a point. I think in reading all of the evidence, we're sort of reaching a point where we've got a couple of numbers stated, and it's just so we're absolutely clear in our mind where those have landed from. Often in evidence, you can sort of see the full story playing out all in one place. But I think because of you've got various different parcels of evidence which are all valid to put the jigsaw together. We're just trying to get to the end point where we've got these two figures specified. And I understand what you said so far, but just so we're absolutely clear on the different calculations.
I will
just to try and save you a bit of time. I think we're now clear on the principle. So this compensatory figure, the difference of site moving from strategic to the local site and the potential for other uses to creep in. So I think we're clear on that now. If you could just specifically just take us through the actual figure rather than cross-referring to the documents, which isn't always helpful, but I think if you could just specifically take us through how that figure has been calculated, because we need to be very clear on that. So it's just those calculations. We were missing something.
so if I may be clear, I am speaking to the B2 and B8 industrial intensification baseline target that's been set. At the risk of perhaps incurring my boss's wrath, I will try and be candid to the examination about this. The council's not seeking to sort of blindside or hoodwink the examination. I think that the council, if I can briefly set the context, the council has explained that it went through a considerable process of negotiation with the Greater London Authority to attempt to understand their concerns, to evidence their position, and subsequently to negotiate a solution. I believe that's demonstrated throughout the submitted documents and the MIQ responses. So I won't dwell on that. But we did find ourselves in the council found itself in a position where the Greater London Authority were insisting that the plan identify a baseline position for industrial intensification that could be monitored and was a reasonable position that we could apply through policy in terms of decision taking.
The baseline position.
The baseline position, and I believe the council understands it, is that the local plan. So this is the Greater London Authority's baseline position, that the new local plan make good the apparent loss of industrial employment land capacity from the 3 redesignated strategic industrial locations. So the calculation that's set out in the note took a very, I think, pragmatic, particularly given at the time, at the point in the process that it was raised as a requirement, a very pragmatic and simple approach. Essentially, our external expert calculated a potential sort of net loss figure for those 3 sites and translated that into a baseline position that's the target that was agreed.
You have to bear with us on this, okay, because we're still trying to get our heads around this. So when you say that the consultant calculated a net loss figure, a net loss from the existing uses on site, and the potential net loss going from a strategic to an industrial site, or net losses which have already taken place, it would just need to be really clear on where that figure.
Yes, so it's the former, and it is based on information that is available, and as stated from the VOA. But
so if it was a former, it would be the potential net loss from going from a strategic site to a locally significant site. What assumptions have been made in that calculation in terms of the potential net loss? What assumption was made, and if that was a former situation?
I think the basic assumption is that the site has been lost as a strategic industrial location, and I think that it is as simple as that.
Is that not compensated for by the newly proposed site, or is that just a rebadging of that? You know what I mean?
I don't believe it attempts to resolve the sort of possible rebadging of the site. If you put it that way, it just assumes a loss.
Wouldn't be compensated for by the newly proposed site.
Sorry, in terms of the Bermondsey dive under site, yes, so we are confident that the Bermondsey dive under site can compensate for the loss. I think the slight confusion here is that we also believe that the LSIS can accommodate an element of B2, B8, but you know the council finds itself in a position where the broad principle of the de-designations is supported and agreed with the Greater London Authority, but essentially it's a matter of accountancy in terms of the figures. So the plan takes a cautionary approach and effectively identifies a need, making the assumption that those three sites in terms of the B2, B8 element is lost in its entirety. In reality, we don't think that will happen, and indeed some of the planning applications that are coming through kind of support that. But that's a position that we've agreed with the GLA, and we're in that position at the moment and putting that forward as the need.
Yeah, I mean, I have a better understanding of the principle behind it. I think it's just where the figures, how the figures are actually being calculated, which I think would be, I don't know whether it's worth using hearing time to kind of get to the bottom of that. It does have the benefit of us being able to ask you questions about it, because I'm still not 100% clear, or whether you could do a separate note just spelling out, you know, the principle behind it, but also how those actual figures are being calculated, unless you can take us through that now. The actual, because those sites, that the three locally strategic sites aren't going to be lost in their entirety, are they? But there seems to be an assumption from the GLA that there would be lost to B2 and B8 uses in their entirety. Is that right?
I think there's only so much we can speak for the Greater London Authority. The council's position, I think, is as David and I have laid out, is clear that LSIS, locally significant industrial sites, have the capacity to deliver some of those B8 and B2 type uses that meet industrial employment demand across the borough. That is the case. Whether how far the GLA share that, or whether they maintain the sort of the concern that it will be sort of unfettered, untrammeled sort of use class E sort of free for all. I can't speak for the GLA on that. I think what I can certainly speak on is the sort of the considerable effort the council has gone to try and meet the GLA's request on securing general conformity, which is why the examination, why we're discussing this matter of the industrial employment baseline target right now. That's to meet their specific request. My apologies.
I think that's what I've been struggling with, though, is the fact that in my mind, those sites aren't necessarily coming out of B2 and B8 use in their entirety, but that is the assumption that's been made. I think that's what I've been struggling with, and so presumably, knowing that now, the figures are just actually what's on site in terms of floor space, and then those have been added back into the requirement in terms of a bit clear on that now, so thank you.
Yes, if I can just very briefly, and I will try and keep this brief. Our colleagues in the Greater London Authority do, and again, it's this point around intensification. They do have a very clear objective. It is set out in the London plan. It's certainly made very clear to the council in the negotiations we've undertaken in the last year of achieving intensification. And if I can speak for my colleagues in the Greater London Authority, I suspect that their objective in our putting that target in is to provide both the council's decision takers and indeed the Greater London Authority's own decision takers with that policy hook to make decisions on proposals that are coming in that either seek to secure intensification on existing industrial sites or perhaps are not using those sites as efficiently as they could.
Yeah, and just to be clear on the point that I made previously, the intention here is not to displace any additional residential development that could go on these sites. The Bermondsey Dive Under is not a suitable residential site in terms of its nature and location. And likewise, as I said before, and just to reiterate that, those redesignated sites as ELSIS, again, I don't think from a placemaking point of view that they would be appropriate sites to have ground floor residential. So the target, I guess, it could be beneficial in terms of providing more jobs. I understand the kind of confusion in terms of our overall position is that there is no demand for growth, but nevertheless, the council in appropriate locations would seek to intensify employment uses because, you know, that is good in the right locations, in our strategic industrial locations and ELSIS, because that offers opportunity for job growth and employment opportunities.
Okay, I think we'll just move on a little bit from that point. Now, in terms of breaking numbers down into and how you intend to meet requirements for each sector, I do fully appreciate we're not in traditional use class order settings anymore, and we have Class E. But in terms of, you know, whilst you say you're meeting the requirement for each of this sector, if we were to try and think of it in more conventional terms, I'm thinking with a head towards the monitoring session, really, in terms of when we get to that stage, we'll be looking for how are you going to monitor these things, and it's obviously it's easier when you can divide things into nice little categories, but planning is changing and it's not necessarily as easy as that. So, you know, can you break it down into how you can demonstrate how you will meet the requirement for each of these sectors? Thank you.
I think that the very simple and short answer is yes. We are confident that we can break it down. As sort of evidence of that, and I'm very pleased to have people on either side of me who have recent experience of dealing with live proposals. This is an issue that the council is already grappling with, and I'm certain it might come up on some of the site allocations. As you know, many of the site allocations are already going through the sausage machine, so these are live issues. I can speak from my own experiences that they are issues that the council is working very positively with development industry partners to resolve and implement. I would point the inspectors to the example of the Creekside site allocation, which is coming out of the ground already. That is a locally significant industrial site. It is delivering residential accommodation on the upper floors. It is also delivering at ground and lower level what I would the sort of the servicing the service type uses that I've described already. I think most notably an industrial scale bakery that's churning out, you know, 2,500 loaves of bread each day. It's a good example in my mind because it's achieving that intensification. It's also servicing the central activities zone, or conceivably servicing the central activities zone. In terms of the decision-taking process, it is also something that's been thought through the pre-application, application, and consent stage, and is monitorable. So I'd cite that as an example. I'm certain that either David or Dean, to my right and left respectively, could probably give better examples.
I think just in terms of the kind of spatial strategy and where we're going to accommodate this, clearly it comes from the hierarchy of employment areas that we have. Obviously, our strategic industrial land, the London plan is very clear about operationally what is suitable within those areas, and we would respond to those operational requirements in any application that comes forward within those sites. That is generally the focus of our B2, B8, the kind of dirtier industrial, albeit there is an element already existing and we think is necessary of other types of B8 uses, such as merchants, building merchants, storage, that type of thing, trade counters, which again support those industries, which are very valid uses within those strategic industrial land sites. Then we have the ELSIS, which I think again a focus of employment, but with greater flexibility to accommodate some of the other uses, the servicing, the services, the office, that type of thing. Then we have our town centres, which are clearly going to be the focus for our office needs, and that's where we'll be directing that type of use. So I think we're quite clear. What I would say is that, again, and I think you've alluded to it, that this is changing, quite rapidly. So, a use which, a kind of industrial use which may not have been appropriate for our town centres maybe 10 years ago, now is becoming kind of appropriate. If you think about the furniture makers or what have you, they can be accommodated in town centres, edge of town centres, locations. So whilst there is undoubtedly complexity involved, I think we have got a clear hierarchy which we'll be responding to, and then through the development management process that we're all involved in, through kind of pre-application discussions, we'll be working with our development partners to understand what the most appropriate uses are within that particular site on a site-by-site basis through the design-led process.
Thank you. I think in terms of sort of more detail on examples, that might be something that would be helpful towards when we get towards the monitoring session. So to keep in mind the examples to help support your monitoring chapter, and when we get to that conversation about monitoring, I think possibly a little bit more data and just thinking around that when you're preparing for that session, that might be helpful. Right, I'm conscious it's coming up to 11 o'clock, and I've got a couple more questions, and also I think Lewisham House number 1 might have some issues with office losses, and we talked about losses in this first section, but then I want to sort of move on to the employment hierarchy. So I think a sort of another 10-15 minutes if you'll indulge us to just get through those, and then we can have a convenient point. So in terms of policies EC5, EC6 and EC7, they contain the detail that goes with the categories. So should those three policies, 5, 6 and 7, contain indicative proportions or splits of what you're expecting through the hierarchy?
I think it's a good question. I think we've already discussed the challenges that would present, but we could certainly make it more apparent and evident the types of uses that, and then reference to the London plan of the types of uses that we would see appropriate within that hierarchy. If that's not clear enough within the plan at the moment, that's something that we could take away. In terms of proportions, I think putting figures to it is going to be quite a complex process. I'm just trying to think about how we would go about achieving that, you know, given essentially that our figure says that we need no overall growth in terms of B2, B8 as a headline figure. You know, obviously the proportion of 0 is 0. We've obviously got the compensatory figure, which we could add in there. And I guess it's a question of, and again, I'm, you know, just speaking out loud here, I guess it's the question of, would that be beneficial for the plan in terms of having an absolute proportion or figure identified within that? Because as we've said, there are evolving typologies, which, again, even within the strategic industrial land sites, there are typologies which are evolving from the Class E use, particularly the ones that Carol has suggested, that are more than suitable for strategic industrial locations. In fact, we should be encouraging those uses within our strategic industrial locations to, again, coin the phrase, service our service industry. So I very much think this is, I think we can explain within the policy, within the supporting text, our assumptions in terms of what types of uses, but I would be wary of putting a concrete figure in terms of the proportions there.
If I just add to that, I'm a development management officer, and obviously lots of sites are different in the way they're composed and their size, and actually applying a one-size-fits-all kind of criteria to these policies would be quite difficult to actually manage through the development management process in actually determining a planning application and considering it. And I think it would actually put some developers off moving forward with sites.
Thank you. I think in terms of sort of explaining a little bit more about the proportions that you envisage, the assumptions, I think would be helpful. I understand your point about nailing down figures. The reason why we look at putting figures in policies is obviously to help the monitoring process and give a stronger steer. But I do understand where you're coming from in that. But I think for policies EC 5, 6 and 7, a little bit more on the indicative proportions might still give that steer, but without perhaps compartmentalizing things too far to then question sort of flexibility and desirability.
I would start by saying that the council can respond very positively to that. I think there's wide recognition across this side of the table that's well, A, that's a reasonable ask, B, that it's certainly achievable. I'm not trying to deflect that, and certainly the council will go away and seek to make that so. But I would just add that certainly those employment use classes that are employment locations that are also subject to site allocations. The site allocations do provide further detail, particularly in terms of the proportions of employment versus non-commercial uses that are delivered on sites. Some of those where it's appropriate, specifically in the MELs, those also break down around main town centre uses as well. So the plan, like I say, I'm not trying to protest too much. That the plan is well, I won't say halfway there, part of the way there in meeting that request, but the council accepts we can do more through those EC policies to provide that clearer link and greater clarity. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that would be helpful because it's sort of a bit of two parts, isn't it? There's the broad uses within the policy that could be considered a little bit more. And maybe those assumptions of figures in supporting text, because that you can explain that that's an assumption, but with it not being in the policy, it's not nailed into decision-making criterion, but it's just kind of round that policy to help the interpretation and the implementation. So if that could be an action point, that would be good. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take that away. Thanks.
And hopefully this may be a very quick question, or it might be something you want to think about. But do your site allocations total up your total employment land? Forgive the really obvious question, but in experience we found that sometimes the figures don't all add up in all directions. So I'm just checking that do all your site allocations total up to your employment land requirement as modified if we're going down that route.
In terms of the total figures and floor space, those are contained within Part 3 of the plan as we've previously identified, so table 13.1, and this looks at the indicative delivery outcomes of the plan period and breaks it down into the sub areas, so central, north, east, south and west. The totals for both town centre uses and employment floor space actually exceeds the overall requirements, and I think we are conscious of those figures exceeding. What I would say is that, and again, you know, we will probably discuss this further when we discuss the detailed site allocations. Those net additional figures exclude consented developments, but what we find is through negotiations with our development partners, in terms of those indicative figures, the residentials tend to be argued up and the non-residential tend to be argued down. So the council is taking a fairly cautious approach in terms of trying to meet our overall non-residential floor space, and in terms of where we will land in terms of individual sites will be through again a process through the development management design-led approach. There's lots of additional information that our development partners will provide and bring to the table at the pre-application stage, which obviously in terms of providing a proportionate evidence base isn't available at the moment for the local plan at this stage because of the strategic nature of the document.
Just a point of clarification on table 3.1. It's obviously got the homes in terms of net units, employment in terms of gross floor space and town centre uses. Where would officers lie within those summary figures? Because arguably there could be employment or town centre. Just as a point of clarification.
Yeah, so sorry, apologies. The question is what is contained within the employment versus the town centre?
In table 13.1 specifically, because obviously the office floor space figure came from the employment land
Yes.
studies.
Yes.
And I don't know whether the town centre uses figure in there is purely just from retail perspective as opposed to offices, but obviously offices could be in either category technically.
Yes, so the employment figure contains office space as well. The town centre includes more than retail. We've also included elements of Class E within that in terms of apologies. The town centre includes Class E, but also town centre uses which may be viable, such as creche, libraries, that type of things as well. So we're trying to take a flexible approach within our town centres because we think, again, that's the right place-making approach. But with the employment, we pulled out the office so that we're quite clear in terms of how we're meeting that requirement for the office figure identified.
Thank you for that. So I think when we're talking about losses, Lewisham House number 1, you had some concerns about office losses. Now I know that's sort of more operational detail of the policy, but the principle of how office losses may be viewed, I think was your concern. That's possibly a good point to raise now, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll probably ask this more as a question than trying to state any sort of facts. I mean, we're looking at it from a very development management perspective, and I've heard what we've been talking about this morning about flexible approaches. I suppose it's simply how do you access this document and consider the loss of, let's say, vacant office space in a town centre? As I read it, it doesn't, that specific geography doesn't seem to fit within any of the employment land hierarchy. And it doesn't seem clear, and maybe I'm just reading it wrong, it doesn't seem clear how you would approach that as a specific example. It doesn't seem that there are any specific tests that you're asking an applicant to deal with. So I suppose it's really just clarity around those points and how you would come to a conclusion as someone that would advise an applicant, I suppose, or if you're a lay person picking up the plan for the first time, how do you know what you are supposed to be doing?
Thank you. From the council, who would like to pick up?
Yes, in terms of how we would approach it, so EC2, protecting employment land and delivering new workspace, is quite clear in terms of setting out our expectation of meeting the forecast need of 21,800 square metres of net floor space. And then we go on to specify the hierarchy in which those or that floor space will be met. I think the point that the respondent is making is on a particular site, on a particular issue, which is a large vacant office block. And clearly we would be looking at the marketing requirements, how long it's been vacant. We'd be looking at information in terms of employment trends, etc., to demonstrate that there is no that there is no potential for that to come back into use as an office block or office accommodation through the policies EC2 and EC. Apologies. EC3. generally speaking, it would be EC2, as I've mentioned. Again, there's a very specific case in point, so it'd be useful to understand a little bit more about what the issues of clarity are to those policies, and you know, if there is any confusion, because I do think we need to be clear within the plan, particularly for these locations, that we can respond to those. Dean, I don't know if you've got anything further to add.
Yeah, just in response to the point on marketing, in the London Plan policy E1, the background text, paragraph 6.17, actually sets out how surplus office space should be marketed. So for surplus, vacant as well. And it says that it should be marketed for 12 months, and it's done through a local assessment of demand and supply and evidence of vacancy, and marketing at market rates suitable for the type, use and size, obviously of the office space, for at least 12 months or greater if required by the local development plan document. At the moment, we don't go greater than 12 months. We'll stick with the London Plan, but there is a policy in place, albeit at regional level, for marketing and how it kind of should be assessed.
Thank you. That's helpful. Sort of criterion E sort of talks about that marketing. I'm just thinking from a clarity point of view, if you're going to rely quite heavily on the London Plan, there is it perhaps easier for the Lewisham Plan to just direct more towards the London Plan rather than give the themes of it, but in reality, if you're going to be pulling out that London Plan off your shelf to use the detail, it would be possibly more helpful to users of the plan. I'm just going to hold that thought, and I'm going to come back to Lewisham House number 1 because you got your Toblerone up, but also if you could sort of comment on sort of where we've got to so far.
Yeah, thanks. I think you're suggesting that that's dealt with through EC2E. Is that right? And I mean, I am here speaking specifically about a site, but equally I advise all over London and other sites in Lewisham. So I'm not really, it is specific to this, but it applies to lots of other office buildings which are vacant and require repurposing. And so I'm speaking more broadly as well. As I read EC2E, which I think is what you're referring to, the confusing part is that where new business floor space, so I wouldn't be applying for new business floor space, I'd be applying to lose business floor space. So perhaps there's a, if you deleted that first part of the sentence and it says just started with changes to other commercial or industrial uses appropriate, etc., then that sort of starts to make some sense. But I suppose in response to Dean's comments, fine, I understand what the London Plan says. I think it would be better if the local plan either sort of directly cross-referenced the relevant parts of the London Plan, or if it's seeking marketing, and you're talking about vacancy, marketing, employment trends, it'd be quite useful for the local plan to set out examples of what it is you would be looking for. Not all of these schemes would be GLA referable, etc., and would be dealing with officers here. A few tweaks, and I think we're probably nearly there.
Thank you. Can I just come back to the council with a final comment, and then hopefully we can take a break.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment and fair point. If I may, if we could take a look at that part E and provide the kind of reference and additional clarification that is sought, then that'd be fabulous. Is that acceptable to everybody? Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, it's 11:20 now by my computer clock, so I think it's time for a comfort break, and I think fresh water is needed. The temperature is starting to rise. Please do feel free to take off outer jackets if you need to be more comfortable. We shall take 20 minutes. Is 20 minutes acceptable to everybody? Yeah. Okay. We're adjourned until 11:40. Thank you very much. Okay, it's 11:40. We'll resume the session on matter 6. So we're going to move into the part of the agenda which is about the employment hierarchy. So that's taking policies EC 5, 6, 7 and 8 together. So in terms of the strategic industrial locations, we've heard a little bit of reference to Bermondsey, the Bermondsey Dive Under, and it's got its own study. So let's start with that one. And I'm going to turn to the council first to explain to the hearing how you consider it to be a suitable replacement for those three sites that are redesignated. And I'm particularly looking at things like the location, the quality, and the quantity of floor space. So those are the themes. Could I start with the council first, please?
Yes, I will. I'll set the strategic context and look to my colleagues for further detail. So in terms of compensatory land to compensate for the 3 redesignated strategic industrial land locations, the Bermondsey Dive Under was used as a storage compound and construction location for the construction of the Bermondsey Dive Under, which is a strategic piece of public transport infrastructure, which freed up capacity in the railway network across London. We were aware that having completed that construction process, that this land would then be available to designate in some shape or form. We worked with our colleagues from Southwark Network Rail and the GLA, looking at the potential for this site with land adjacent to the borough in Southwark, looking at what the potential options are for that location. Given the nature of the site, and I refer to figure 8 of the Bermondsey Dive Under survey report, which provides our designation of the BDU site, but also a helpful aerial photograph. Inspectors will see that the site itself is bound on each side by railway infrastructure and railway arches which cross the site. Through the work that we did, it was clear that this had the opportunity to be designated as strategic industrial land due to its nature, and particularly the fact that it is bounded by railways and in some way sort of separated from the existing residential areas, that it would be an appropriate use for industrial uses. We also looked at the London plan and looking at figure 9 of the same document, page 23. This considers the operational requirements as set out by the London plan. There are a number of requirements in the London plan. It is important to say that the strategic industrial land doesn't need to meet all of those requirements, but nevertheless, in terms of our assessment, we think it can. And it's important to know currently that Network Rail are using it as related strategic industrial land functions currently. And as I've explained, the figure 9 shows that it can meet those requirements. So in terms of the suitability, we think, given the nature and the character of the site, given the location of the site close to existing strategic industrial land, this forms a natural extension of that. There has been some concerns raised by the Greater London Authority about the access to the site, and I think we'd just like to note that this isn't too dissimilar to Surrey Canal strategic industrial land, which again is accessed via a road which has limited height restrictions underneath the railway bridge. So again, there isn't too much difference between our existing strategic industrial land and this piece of land. And then furthermore, in terms of the residential or the street that accesses this, we accept that there is residential development along that street. We have a site allocation and an approved permission which is being constructed on the opposite side of the street, which includes employment on the ground floor and residential above. And again, I'd note that this is a fairly typical arrangement within inner London boroughs, where you do have strategic industrial land accessed via streets which have residential development on them. That is the nature of the compact urban environment that London and Lewisham comprises of. Carol, anything further?
My apologies for my Toblerone dithering up and down. Just as a very brief point of clarity, David referred to the Bermondsey Dive Under, I think, within two contexts. There is the wider site that is technically the Bermondsey Dive Under, the piece of strategic rail infrastructure. That wider site was the subject of technical work that was undertaken by the council in partnership with Network Rail and Southwark. I believe that some of that information has been submitted, or at least has certainly been referred to in evidence submitted to the examination. That work covered a wider site that includes the site allocation, but references to the Bermondsey Dive Under, for clarity, may be wider than just the site allocation that is currently in the new local plan as a strategic industrial location. I should add that given the geographic location, that there is parts of the Bermondsey Dive Under to the immediate northwest of the site, as the lines go in towards London Bridge, which are already being subject to redevelopment, and if I can use that portmanteau word, industrification. So industrial employment uses are already taking place on parts of the wider Bermondsey Dive Under in neighbouring Southwark, and that's being brought forward, I understand, in part by Network Rail. For further clarity, Network Rail retain full ownership of the Bermondsey Dive Under site allocation. They are the strategic infrastructure operator for the railway lines that cross it. They retain full control of part of the site, as my colleague David Syme said, the sort of the component that is identified as strategic industrial location. They have leased out the two sets of railway arches that are closest to Silwood Street, to the northeast of the site. As a point of interest, I think as you travel through the site on the train from Catford Bridge to London Bridge, you will note that there is ongoing activity across the site. I think, as David may have mentioned, that the Network Rail part of the site, and I believe this may be reflected in the statement of common ground with Network Rail, the Network Rail part of the site, that is the strategic industrial location, is in active use as B8 open storage. My understanding and this is reflected, I believe, in the responses and the submission documents that have been made to the examination. My understanding is that that activity is related to network upgrades across South London, and is likely to be ongoing until at least 2028. The council contends that that demonstrates that the site is appropriate for strategic industrial employment uses, particularly strategic B8 uses. Just one final point in terms of the access. I think the council are not trying to conceal the fact that there are issues with the access. Nevertheless, that access point onto the site is 14 and a half feet. And there are, I think that's a sort of a standard maximum height for a railway arch site. So any major road across South London that passes under a railway line, that's the maximum height. So whilst there may be some access constraints, it's not necessarily within the full spectrum of those constraints. Thank you.
Thank you. And in terms of the quantity of floor space that you're expecting at Bermondsey Dive under?
We've done the calculation on land as per the GLA's request. So the combined sites, which will be redesignated from strategic industrial land to ELSIS, have a combined area of 1.24 hectares in comparison to the BDU site, which has an area of 1.88 hectares. That's the sort of calculation that we've done at the moment, as opposed to the floor space. Although the study and the report that Carol mentioned previously, which is referenced within the Bermondsey Dive Under survey report, did look at the kind of floor space figures. I can't see it immediately within the Bermondsey Dive Under survey report, but that is something that we could provide to the inspectors coming out of that study.
That would be helpful, please, if that could be an action. I'm just looking at the BDU survey report, so that's the May 2024, so that's LC 13, and I'm just scrolling away to figures 9 and 10. My question on that is the assessment, the conclusion, the column just refers to yes, it does meet the London plan satisfactorily. I'm just trying to understand what the reason is there. That's the conclusion. So I'm on page 23 of, and that's the railway arches at the BDU site. So figure 9 and then figure 10 follows on about the open storage. So it's just in terms of the questions are there in one column, and then does the site meet the requirement? Yes. And I'm just wondering what comes between column 1 and column 2 in your thought process, please.
Yes, I appreciate that probably could have been expanded on in terms of our professional judgment, and again, I'm sure the council can provide greater clarity on that thought process. But generally, as an example, what we've looked at is, what is the London Plan policy requirement within the category, and could that reasonably be located within the Bermondsey Dive Under? What are the key constraints? Are there any key constraints? And I think we concluded that, given the nature of the land, that and given the requirements that we've looked at, we didn't think there was any fundamental constraints that would prohibit those types of uses. You know, light and general industrial, for example, could easily be accommodated within that site. You know, with the access arrangements, with the cleared area that it is at the moment. You know, likewise in terms of open storage, you know, it is already being used as that function. So we can certainly provide further clarity and detail on our professional judgment and the assumptions that we were making, which then underpins our decisions in figure 9 and 10.
I think that would be quite helpful to us in terms of that thinking. You know it, but from our perspective, we've got a column that really there should be something in the middle space of it, just so we can understand. So a short note. You know, we're not seeking something that's particularly lengthy. I think it's just an action to take away on the list and flesh that out with the reasoning that you're obviously aware of. But if you could present that to us, that would be most helpful. Now, this particular site talks about it's got a dual allocation, hasn't it? So it's SIL and LSIS, and I'm just thinking, how is that going to work in practice? Normally, you have an allocation, and it is one clearly defined thing, and everyone knows where it is. You know, you might have a scenario, I don't know whether more SIL comes forward or more LSIS comes forward, and how do you know, developers know precisely what sort of is going in your mind there? I don't mind who responds.
We'll be fighting for it before the end of the morning. I think without wishing, it seems perhaps like it's obvious to officers at the table, this response. So forgive me if it comes across that way. It's not intended to. That I think the site splits up. Actually, when you visit the site, if you have already visited it, you may already have a similar impression yourselves. The site does divide up quite logically. The boundaries that are defined are defensible. So the strategic industrial location part of the site is predominantly can predominantly be characterized as open land that is sandwiched between those strategic rail lines that travel into London Bridge. The locally significant industrial site part of the site is characterized differently in that it is primarily structures in the form of railway arches that can readily be converted into covered employment floor space simply by blocking each end off, and there is the sort of the space that sits between it. I think as the study, the Bermondsey Dive Under Survey study report, I think quite eloquently sets out the railway arch typology is distinctive. It's not unique to Lewisham, but it is certainly distinctive to this part of Lewisham. There is, I think it is a matter of fact that there is a lot of modern and, well, historic and modern railway infrastructure in the north of the borough. Indeed, it's the same here in Catford, that lends itself to that form of intensification and conversion, and that's the sort of typological differentiation between the sites. They are defensible. That's in boundary terms, and clearly discernible in boundary terms. I think I would offer to the examination the argument from the council that they are also operationally, they can be operationally separated from one another, whilst road access onto the strategic industrial location component is desirable and quite probably is necessary because it can be accessed from the railway line and is currently being used operationally for maintenance of the railway network. It's not necessary to do so from the road network, and particularly that may be the case in the sort of the larger materials that are stored across that site. At this juncture, I would refer to London Plan Policy E4 and cross-reference to Part A5, which specifically speaks to that sort of strategic sustainable transport infrastructure. It alludes to operational infrastructure, but it doesn't exclude sites such as the Bermondsey Dive Under, which service that infrastructure. There are other similar sites to the Bermondsey Dive Under across the borough. There is one to the immediate, I'm going to say northwest west of the site, a quite expansive part of the borough's strategic infrastructure location portfolio that is almost exclusively used to support the railway network. There is a further non-designated strategic employment site at Hither Green, which I believe is alluded to in a number of submitted documents, which serves a similar function in supporting the wider strategic rail infrastructure network. There are other sites as well further to the south of the borough that perform in this manner. Logically, they are all connected to the strategic rail network, and rather than to more sort of wider geographical connections, if that makes sense. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Syme, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just from a practical sense as well, I appreciate that figure 8.1 in terms of the employment land hierarchy, given the scale that it operates at, isn't particularly clear in terms of the distinction between ELSIS and SIL, but rest assured the policy map is, and the council's GIS system as well is, you know, obviously very accurate. So when planning applications come in, officers will be able to distinguish between the component which is ELSIS and the component which is SIL.
I would very briefly reiterate the point which I think was made probably by myself earlier on, that the land ownership is neatly distributed between strategic industrial location owned and controlled by Network Rail and the locally significant industrial site, which is ultimately owned by Network Rail but leased to the Arch Company. So the land ownership is reflective of the two designations.
Thank you. That's helpful. Because we have got representations from the Arch Company on this matter as well. Obviously, their concerns about the designation and whether it should be non-designated or whether it could be justified as an ELSIS. So I think they're sort of pulling in a different direction. But if you say that the parcels of land ownership are quite clear, is it likely there would be any other interest from other developers to come onto that site? I'm thinking it's, yes, you'll know when a planning application comes in, you plot it, it shows up the details and things. But from any prospective developer looking around the area, how likely is that in this context?
I think as the examination may hear on other matters, that the council does work closely with Network Rail, and we are champing at the bit to get you the statement of common ground between the council and Network Rail on this matter. I think in broad terms, the council understands that Network Rail as a public landowning body does have a duty to sort of optimise the value of its land. The council's understanding is that the Network Rail needs the strategic industrial location component of the Bermondsey dive under for its own purposes. There's no evidence to the contrary. Obviously, that is not to say that at some future point it may become surplus to their requirements, but that is currently unknown. I would very briefly reiterate the fact that Network Rail is factually a major landowner across the borough. It owns and operates and manages the strategic rail network across the borough. It has the need for sites such as the Bermondsey Dive Under to maintain, and as the examination has heard, also enhance the network into the future. So it's logical that the site will remain necessary for operational purposes going forward.
And just in terms of, we've talked about the BDU survey report from May 2024, that's the LC13. Just for my note, the Mayor's office have seen that, haven't they? That's been part of the conversations. Just thinking, you've had a lot of conversations with them, and I'm just checking that they have had sight of it.
Yes.
And they're comfortable with the content.
I believe so. A statement of common ground says so. Yes.
Yeah, to the best of your knowledge, they're content with it. Mr. Gibson.
Just coming back on the floor space issue you raised, in evidence base 25, there's the Bermondsey Dive Under survey report, which is basically a master plan Southwark kind of undertook. And on page 56 of that document, there is a floor space schedule, an area schedule for plot 4, which is the Bermondsey Dive Under site. And that gives indications of what kind of floor spaces can be put onto the site in terms of different uses coming forward, like storage, for example.
Thank you. That's helpful for looking at it.
If I could just very briefly clarify, the study that my colleague has just referred to is the study that both David and I referred to earlier on, so that the examination does have a copy of it. Which document is it under?
EB25.
EB25. Thank you.
So I should say page 57, not 56.
Now, we mentioned briefly there are other sites and Hither Green. So is that something that's needed or not? Or is it something that you kept in reserve and you could put it in if necessary? Just trying to work out what the background is to that one.
Yes, I mean, we looked at the Hither Green site, and it is performing a very similar role currently to the Bermondsey Dive Under. I think just to say that in terms of future land use within the Bermondsey Dive Under, we obviously prepared the study that you've had the reference to with Network Rail, who were looking at options for the future. So whilst the requirement currently is looking at they require the site for network rail enhancements. They were actively looking at, so what happens at a point in the future? Is this a site that could be disposed of, or is this a site that we develop ourselves as industrial floor space? Whereas the Hither Green has a very clear operational requirement, which is likely to continue. So for that reason, and also the geographical position of the Bermondsey Dive Under, i.e. it's very close to the de-designated sites and also part of a wider strategic SIL designation, we felt that the Bermondsey Dive Under was more appropriate. But yes, the council have considered that, but is not putting that forward at this present moment for strategic industrial land.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on the SIL? So just in terms of to catch up on modifications, we have MO 46. So that's about table 8.1, showing the BDU being the dual designation. I think you've explained how that can work in practice, and you know, I did have a question about whether figure 8.1 could be made clearer, but I think at the scale that it's at, I think it's possibly that's where it's reached. In terms of the other modifications on the requirement, so you've added in the composite version, the 17th of June version, we've got MO 206, 207, 208, 209, 210 and 211. And correct me if I've missed any. So those all relate to the requirement that we spoke about this morning, and the extra text that goes into the paragraphs. So I think for ease, we would probably look for that to be one modification ultimately, rather than several. I know it probably emerged by, so well, we'll have one here and then we'll have another one. So I can understand how, but we bring it together into one. That would be a good thing to do if you could just make a quick note.
I can very happily confirm to the examination that once I get some time off tomorrow, hopefully I'll be looking at this. So yes, we will consolidate the modifications under there, as the inspectors have suggested.
Thank you, Phil. Right, so let's just move on to the locally significant industrial sites. Now, is this something that Kitewood Estates were interested in?
Yes, although it's primarily the detail rather than principle. So I'll hear obviously what's said, and if there's anything that I want to comment on, I will let you know. But I'm imagining that most of our comments will fall within one of the later matters when we're talking about the specific LSIS of Kitewoods.
Thank you for that. So in terms of the principle, we have a number of representations which we're quite happy to take a view on. I don't have any further questions unless the council want to make any further comments on the LSIS.
Only to sort of, and forgive me if this is labouring a point, it's the sort of the terminology, the sort of nomenclature that's been used with LSIS. The sites were under the previous core strategy referred to as local employment locations. I think if I can be so bold as to suggest that people should just ignore that the difference is they were still essentially locally designated employment sites within the context of the London plan. So technically they've always been locally significant industrial sites in the London plan context. It's just that for whatever reason they were given a different name by the previous core strategy, but in terms of how they operated, the uses that were being directed towards them, how they served as a mechanism for regeneration, the same.
Okay, so moving on to the mixed-use employment locations, the MELS, policy EC7. In terms of my question 6.14, 6.15, site selection and how you've determined the appropriate uses for these. If you could just explain a little bit more for me. Mr. Syme, are you going to take that one?
Yes, I'll take this one. So just to be clear, all MELs are essentially core strategy designations that have been brought forward through to the local plan. So these are all sites which I think we've discussed before were released from industrial, vacant industrial land to mixed employment land. They are all sites which currently have planning applications, active planning applications, some of which have been built, some of which some of which are being constructed. The ones that have been built, I think we've removed from the plan. And those that are not currently under construction, we have got planning approvals on. So we have carried those forward. I think it's really important to say that those designations have been critical to the regeneration, particularly to the north of the borough, in providing mixed-use employment-led regeneration. Those MELs are included within the base assumptions of the London SHLA in terms of the number of homes delivered. They're also included in the assumptions for the opportunity areas outlined in the London plan, which includes the number of homes and the number of jobs created. So these are very much part of our regeneration spatial framework, and as I said, are effectively, most are on site and being developed or delivered.
Okay, thank you for that. And just to finish off the suite of them, the non-designated employment sites. Just in terms of if you're looking for an employment site and you're not choosing one within the hierarchy, how would one know when policy EC8 is required?
Yes, I think as is demonstrated in figure 2.1 of EB22, we have attempted to map all the industrial land within Lewisham, which includes non-designated industrial land. I guess you'll appreciate that by its very nature, it's distributed across the entirety of Lewisham, and there are lots of non-designated sites. So, I mean, on a practical level, if the site has got or had previously industrial employment uses, and is not designated within the policy map, then we would consider it non-designated employment sites and then deal with it through the development management process. I'm not sure, Dean, if you've got any anything else to add, whether that's a complexity or a concern that has been raised at the development management side of things?
I think most developers realise if their site is an employment site or subject to a designation, if they don't, then generally they would ask us at pre-application if they come in with a pre-application inquiry. If they come in with a planning application, then we take a view on whether the site should be protected or the degree of protection that should be afforded to it based on its individual circumstances.
Thank you for that. Right, let's move on to retail and town centre land requirements then, please. So looking to policy EC12 and EC13. There was as an opening question to the council, similar to employment this morning. In EC12 there is a floor space set out. So in terms of the methodology, how did you get to that figure, please?
Yes, if I start and then I may hand over to my colleague in terms of the detailed methodology. So the assessment of retail need is set out within EB24, which is the Lewisham Retail Impact Assessment and Town Centre Trends, December 2021. That sets out the kind of methodology. It looks at the existing designated centres and floor space, the trends which will be prevalent moving forward, and then makes recommendations. But if I hand over to my colleague Keenan to provide greater clarity on the methodology.
Yep, so within the Lewisham Retail Impact Assessment and Town Centre Trend Study, the methodology adopted for this analysis and the quantitative capacity analysis in terms of levels of spending for convenience and comparison shopping and food beverage. This is outlined under section 3, updated floor space capacity assessment on pages 15 to 23, which breaks down the methodology according to assumptions and base data, study area zones and population, retail expenditure, growth and turnover densities, base year market shares, and future market shares. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of, my question 621, so the figure in the policy, my understanding from the evidence is there's only a need for convenience, which includes your food and beverage, and there's actually an oversupply of the comparison. Is that correct? Yes. Now, I believe Quad had, on behalf of Landsec, I think you had a representation, and your hearing statement was talking about the oversupply point. So in terms from your perspective, what's unsound in this policy?
I think from our point of view, there's two fundamental issues. First of all, the evidence base itself, we've got concerns it's not up to date. I think the Matter 6 statement provided by the council at paragraph 6.19.2 says the council highlights the latest technical evidence has been prepared in the post-COVID-19 pandemic period and considers the impact of that event upon retail and town centre patronage. I think the issue is, although the study was published in December 2021, which you may question whether it is actually post the pandemic, the underlying assumptions are it relies on a household survey completed in 2015, it's obviously pre-pandemic. It relies on expenditure estimates from 2019, published in 2019, obviously pre-pandemic. It relies on forecasts produced in October 2020, which was still in the pandemic, so the full implications on sort of future growth were not known at this stage. So those three We have no issue with the approach of the study. It's just the three key elements underpin the study are all pre-pandemic and relying on a household survey in 2015 to understand future development needs when pandemics had a major impact in terms of home working, online shopping, which has not been factored in fully as part of this assessment. But putting aside the sort of the evidence base, we have some fundamental concerns that the council's own evidence base identifies as an oversupply floor space anyway. We think that's an underestimate, but regardless of that, we think there's an oversupply. But the policy approach on the back of the evidence base seems to suggest it refers to an 8,400 square metre need figure, which doesn't really clarify that's actually predominantly convenience need. There is no capacity for comparison need. But then they go on and say the need should be met in sort of the higher order centres of Lewisham and Catford. But given the need is convenience, which is generally done locally, why would you have a strategy which focuses all the development into the higher order centres, which their own hierarchy says is a comparison-led destination, and not meet the needs the council's own evidence identifies? So there's a knock-on effect on all the policy approach from, in our view, a misinterpretation of what the findings of the evidence say, putting aside our concerns on the actual findings and what the capacity figures are. I think we are concerned that the sort of EC11, whilst it's supported, then EC12 to 14 then doesn't really follow on that there is a contracting retail market, and the policy seems still trying to protect sort of the class EA, sort of A1 in old money approach, which isn't what the evidence actually suggests. It says there is a need for convenience, and convenience shopping is done locally, so why should it be in Lewisham and Catford? Hopefully explained. So I don't want to get bogged down in a whole technical debate. I don't think it's relevant at this stage. We've set out in our representations our concerns, but I think fundamentally we think the policy approach needs to be revised to actually reflect what the evidence suggests.
Thank you. Who would like to take that one from the council?
Yeah,
Mr. Syme?
I will take that. And I think I want to just point out the kind of MPPF paragraph 31 that says the preparation review of all policy should be underpinned by relevant and up-to-date policy, but this should be adequate and proportionate. So just draw the inspector's attention to the retail studies that the council has done in 2015, 2017, 2019, and then December 2021. I guess the question I would ask is, where does it end? At some point, we have to make a decision on progressing to Regulation 19 and then progression to submission. Otherwise, we'd be in a perpetual process of updating evidence base. And I accept the fact that the retail data and the forecasts from Experian has been revised 3 times since 2021. So 2022, 23 and 24. And again, I would just, ask the question, where do we stop? Do we continually update the evidence base, particularly in terms of retail that is changing, on a yearly basis, essentially? So we've also asked, we asked our consultants, the experts who prepared our Lewisham retail impact assessment and town centre trends, how would they respond to that? And, essentially they've said that in terms of the data that Quad are quoting, that's not actually being used to quantify the actual amount of available expenditure. They've used other methods and techniques and their assumptions, professional judgment on the post-COVID recommendations. So I think whilst we accept the point that there is maybe more updated evidence, I'd just like to point out that we do have to be proportionate, and evidence is evolving all the time. I think in terms of a practical application point of view, I'd also like to say that, obviously we are working with Quad and Landsec in a proactive way on the site, and we've arrived at a position where we are both happy with the non-residential floor space that they are providing through the design-led process. And I think, as I said before, what we have within the plan in terms of the supply is an oversupply versus the demand based on our knowledge and practical implications through the development management process, where we know that essentially indicative capacity